Welcome to New Realities. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and today I have back on this program Carl Pearson, who is running for State Attorney General of New York State, coming up in, well, first he has to get on the ballot, but Carl will go into that.
Okay.
Personally, I don't do these kind of shows a lot because I don't really like politics. I think, why can't just everyone love each other and have a peaceful world? And it seems like politicians aren't really about helping people. They want their own egos gratified. They want power. A true politician is a public servant. When I interviewed Dennis Kucinich, he says, I'm a public servant. He's one of the few politicians I like. So what's wrong with politics today?
Do you want the truth?
Yeah.
You sure? Are you sure
yeah,
you can take the truth?
Yeah.
I rubbed shoulders with Dennis about 6 months ago, and,
Okay.
I'm really thrilled that I was able to sit alongside him in
Yes.
a church, and he is so really great guy.
Okay,
I really, and I agree with you. There are very few politicians that, and I'm not going to malign him at all, and others like him,
That's
if
okay.
any. But politicians basically at the federal level and the state level have to be crooked.
What? They are there to serve
They're
the
not.
people.
They're not.
They're not there to serve.
It's evolved to be that they are there to serve the people who pay to get them there and keep them there. It's as simple as that.
There must be a few here and there.
I'm
that
sure there
aren't
are.
crooked.
I would hope.
I mean,
well, crooked is a
Obama
relative
doesn't
term.
seem all crooked.
Oh,
I mean,
come on now. I mean, he came in as the great white hope. And it never worked out that way. He became Bush 4 pretty quickly.
Wait, why do you? I mean, he's not. He hasn't ended the war. He hasn't. Yeah, I mean, he could say he's angry about the oil spill. That doesn't mean anything. But I think he's sincere in trying to make change. I think the system's being run by the people behind the scenes.
That's
It is not
correct.
being run by the politicians.
Well, that's correct. They hire people to run for office, and
Who's they?
They are the banking interests, and I never believed this before. At least I had an open mind, but I think that you have to look at the Trilateral Commission for whatever it is. Who
is the triad? I mean, I hear people talk about that.
I believe that you have a group of people that are very influential in determining policy throughout the world, and that the Trilateral Commission, whoever it is, Brzezinski and others, Rockefeller-based, are part of that.
You think they control the world and the world economy?
I think that the control is a shared control. The banking interests, to a very great extent, have the money to make it happen, so that the banking interests are very critical here. And notice that it's the banking interests that ruined the country and the banking interests that got paid off, and that the banking interest that's back here doing the same thing without any regulation.
I didn't understand that whole banking payoff thing where they said the companies were collapsing. If they didn't bail them out, people would lose a lot of jobs.
The people that were saying that were paid by the bank to say that.
Wait, so it wasn't true?
They're back doing their same thing again.
Well, let's say they didn't get the bailout.
Right.
What would have happened to those companies?
We don't know. They said that they needed the money, and the government gave them the money, but the government was themselves. They gave themselves the money to correct the problem that they created, and they're back doing the same thing again, and they're opposing any regulation that tries to cure the problem or to cure the problem that bigness.
What is the problem? But also that money went right into the pockets of the executives. It did.
Right.
I mean,
no, not all. Most of it did not.
Where did most of it go?
In fact, I don't even mind the $500,000 bonus a year. You know why?
I mind.
You know why I mind? I don't mind.
Why?
Because it's a telltale sign of who's making too much money, and we ought to act on the trillions that they make, not the billions that they give away. It's a false sign. They direct you to the wrong issue
okay,
here.
but what's wrong with the system? Obviously, there's something wrong with the system.
The system is that we allow the banks to merge and get larger, and the competition to be eliminated, so that we only have 2 or 3 banks that are working.
We have Bank of America.
We have several
banks.
banks. We have Citibank, Chase, and Bank of America.
And are they really all one bank, or are they in competition with each other?
Well, for example, you've heard of, if you have 3 people making a part for the Army,
right?
you could expect them to get together and agree not to compete with each other. They'll share the contracts. So the banking industry, when you only have three big players, are not really competing. They're agreeing to divide up the spoils, and they take a share. The competition isn't there really.
Let me ask you about economy and politics to begin with. The idea of capitalism is that it's a free market. People compete, or companies compete, to keep the prices down, and people have the free choice to choose the products they want the best.
Give me the area in which it's free. For example, do you know that you cannot open up a commercial bank?
I can't open up my own bank.
So it's not competitive. You're not allowed to open up a bank.
How do you get to open a bank?
It has to be permission.
How do you get permission to open a bank?
Political. It's a political
I mean,
provision.
let's say someone had a lot of money, or I don't know if you even need money to open a bank.
Well, if I'm sure we have congressmen or we have senators or assembly people in New York that would be willing to sponsor a law or sponsor you or give a good word if you have to make an application to a banking commission to set up the right to open up a bank.
But isn't there a lot involved in opening a bank? I mean, I need FDIC, which means the government protects the money that's in the bank in case the bank loses the money.
Have they really protected anything?
Well, I don't know.
They haven't. Look what happened.
I avoid politics and banks.
The banking people eliminated the Glass-Steagall Act which Bush did for them. They eliminated the one statute that we needed that stopped the banks from gambling by putting money that was supposed to be in the banking industry and putting it into investment banking. So they gambled the monies that they were holding.
So there was a law that said the banks couldn't gamble.
That was the Glass-Steagall Act.
And Bush
eliminated that.
Bush himself.
Yes, they eliminated that statute by congressional act signed by the president.
And because he eliminated it, what was the result?
The banks then took the depositors' money and they started selling credit default swaps and
what was the result of that?
That result was these were all gambling contracts that were really illegal, and they created nothing new in the economy.
But what was the economic result?
The economic result was that they were selling worthless pieces of paper and pocketing the money, putting it in their pocket, taking excess compensation, and delivering nothing but trouble because these were toxic.
The banks were doing this.
Yeah, the banks were doing it.
Like Chase,
yes.
Bank of America, they were all
doing it, and that's why, because their economy, because the assets they had were so questionable. Other banks were refusing to lend money. They were all afraid that any one bank would go under. So because we had banks that were too large to fail, and it looks like the banks were failing because they had invested in assets that were worthless, they took the money out, put it in their pocket with
How could they put it? You mean they put it back into their business?
No, they gave huge salaries. They gave huge commissions. They took the money out. What happened on a sale of a mortgage, for example? The banks encouraged everyone to make mortgages, and they didn't care.
Let me back up and be really simple.
Sure.
I want to buy a house, so I go to the bank.
Let's say you have no money at all.
I have no money.
Okay, and you want a nice $1 million house.
Right.
So you were a great customer for the bank.
Okay.
With no money at all, they were able, thanks to Cuomo.
I mean, I had to have a job and show that
Not really.
No.
You could be self-employed, a subprime.
I could be self-employed.
Alt-A. It's called an Alt-A mortgage, self-employed.
Okay, so I would go to the bank and say...
So you want to borrow $1 million.
But it would be increments. I mean, okay.
It's all, it doesn't matter.
So
you want to borrow
$1 million to buy a house,
right.
And they would say, fine.
Yeah, and then come in on Monday and we'll give you the money.
Well, they don't give me all the money.
Well, so
they give it to the person I want to buy the house from.
Well, they would.
And then I pay the bank back.
Yeah, then they're going to have you pay $14,000 a month.
$14,000
and then you
until
pay
the million
and you
is
pay
paid.
it for a month or so, and then you can't pay it. So then your mortgage is in default. Meanwhile, the bank already sold the mortgage. The day they got that money, the bank sold the mortgage to a trust. And the trust sold interest in that to people in China, to Russia, to Germany. They subdivided your mortgage and sold interest in it.
So I want something that does to me. So I have a student loan, right?
Yeah. Okay, they sell interest in that too.
They sell interest. So I got it from the state of New Mexico, and then they sold it because now it's like a couple of companies down,
right.
And they keep, I mean, is that illegal?
Well, it's gambling to some extent.
I mean,
but
do I have to pay that back?
Well, that's Bush as a present to the banks that gave him the money that he used to win. Bush 2. The first statute he passed, he signed, gave the banks that the student loans could not be dishonored in bankruptcy.
But Obama just passed, because the student loan company told me, Obama said the student loan doesn't have to be paid. I mean, we could.
They haven't passed it. You could pay it off if you work 15, so many years.
If you're not employed at a certain level, you don't incur interest, and you have, so the amount of time to pay it back.
It's worthless. Look, for people that have people owe $100,000 getting out of school, paying excessive tuition to these schools. They owe $100,000. They get a job for $8,000 a year if they're lucky, or $10,000 or $20,000. Many can't get a job.
Someone coming out of Harvard with a Harvard law degree will get
a different. Let's just talk about somebody getting out of Harvard College that owes $80,000.
Okay.
So he gets a job at $30,000, $40,000 a year.
Okay.
And he pays taxes at 12 on that, so he comes up with $28,000. Now his student servicing this loan of $100,000 at 8% is $8,000 a year to service. Where does he get the $8,000?
Wait, his loan to service is $8,000 a year,
more or less,
on top of the money he's borrowed, like 10%.
Well, you got to pay interest.
So you're saying, what is the story with interest?
Interest is vigorous that the bank gets for lending money that it got for nothing from the U.S. government.
That's why I don't understand.
That's where they.
That's why. So
the Federal Reserve is a government owned by the banks.
So
the banks, there's a great book out there by Grider called Secrets of the Temple. It's this thick, and I read it. And I never understood what I read. I read the whole thing, and I said, wow. But I only really understood it now in this crisis that came up.
Right. So if the government...
Eustace Mullins wrote Secrets of the Federal Reserve, and that came off that book.
Yeah, so this is the Federal Reserve is owned by these big banks, but we don't really know which banks and what percentage.
Well, I just want to go back. My student loan was produced by the government. They gave me a certain amount, and they gave it to me. And so, in a sense, the government is owed the interest that they lent me, right?
Well, the government paid interest on the money that it lent to you.
The government paid it to who?
To the Federal Reserve.
But didn't the government create the money to begin with?
No, the Federal Reserve created it.
The Federal Reserve?
Yeah.
And how do they have the power to create money?
They took it by a statute. They took it as a compromise of these. Remember William Jennings Bryan and that cross of silver? He ran for president.
There's a statue of him
all resolved
at
itself.
Bryant Park, actually, was named
It
after
all
him.
resolved itself, and it was settled where the Federal Reserve was created as an aftermath of the populist movement, and that is what really hurt the country. It didn't solve it. It created the big problem. It gave the ownership of the right to create money to the banks.
Wait, so I just want to absorb this. You're saying the Federal Reserve creates money with the permission of the government.
No, I don't think it's with the permission of the government. They just create it as a right that they've taken to themselves.
It must be in touch with other countries creating money. You just can't create money. Otherwise,
that's why there's a banking cabal in the world that dominates the world. And when we paid all that money to salvage the banking system, a lot of foreign banks got the money. Not just American banks, but they're not even American. Forget the fact that Citibank has a name that you can recognize in English.
Bank of America is not American.
They're not. They're international interests all over the place.
You know, maybe you can help clear up another interview I did with a guy named Jordan Maxwell, where he said there's two types of law. There's the law of the land and the law of the sea. And when you enter the court, you're not in the law of the land. You're at the law of the sea. You pass the bench. You go through the bar. And you have to talk to the judge in these black robes who represents the Saturn.
He's talking probably about an Admiralty court.
Maritime Admiralty. He says our courts are based on that.
There's two basic areas. Most of the Admiralty issues are done by arbitration, and we have an arbitration panel in New York, and we have one in London. Most of the issues go there. But when they're not, when they go into court, you have Admiralty rules, and Admiralty rules are different from the normal rules. We have Admiralty rules basically in federal court. It's an Admiralty.
Why? So what is that? What's
well,
the
it's
consequence
international.
of that?
They're international.
But what's the consequence on someone going into court?
Well, somebody can go into court and arrest a ship that's here in court and take that ship and hold it there. A sheriff can go down and impound the ship if you owe money to somebody and that you're the ship owner. You haven't paid for your goods or the oil that you take on.
So what's the result of that?
Well, the result it's an international law. Admiralty law is international law. And I've dealt with it. I had a case in which my client had found the single largest sunken treasure ever uncovered in the world.
Wow.
The $5 billion of the SS Central America, which went down in 1847. So people had bought the map that my client had created with a super secret side scan sonar of the U.S. Navy that he ran a haircut on the ocean bottom, and they found the place where he thought the gold was. Somebody bought that map and drove right up to the gold and went down with a picker and picked up a piece of coal and brought that coal into the district court in Norfolk, Virginia, and claimed that he had the right now to exclude everyone from that ship because that is evidence of the ship. So that's Admiralty Court.
Okay, and what was the result of that?
They were able to keep everyone away and mine that gold. And Tommy Thompson is a name, SS Central America, and they've had a lot of litigation since then. And apparently, none of the investors got any gold so far. And this is about 15 or 20 years later.
All right, let's get back to you. Why did you become a lawyer, and why are you running for Attorney General, State Attorney General? And what difference do you think you can really make if all these powers are in place?
I started out as a high school dropout. I went to college, and in a year and a half, I became the president of the student body. I took decades off from politics. I went to Harvard Law School, and my attitude there was conditioned by the law school that you learn, there's a great majesty in the law, that you learn it and you can do great things.
And did you love that part?
Well, you're inculcated with it. You don't love it. That's part of it's training. You learn how to be a lawyer and you think like a lawyer and all that. So I went to Wall Street and I wound up in the
Wall
law
Street
firm.
As a lawyer?
As a lawyer.
For Wall Street.
And I wound up working in the firm that Dick Nixon joined.
Did you know Mr.
I
Nixon?
met him. I didn't.
Okay.
I talked with him and I had lunch with him, but you don't really get to know him.
1 degree separation from
It's nothing, believe me.
Nixon.
It's nothing.
Okay.
His son-in-law just aced me out. I tried to get the nomination of the Republican Party, and
You're a Republican?
I'm not, but I have the nomination already from the Libertarian Party. I tried to get, but anyway.
So
now I feel that with all of the legal stuff that I know and a lifetime spent trying to help people in the law, I've figured out that it really hasn't added up to very much at all. You have
helped people, though.
Well, but I haven't changed anything.
Okay.
Very few things have changed as a result of a lifetime of really knowing what to do, how to do it, and that it doesn't change things. Your client gets paid maybe and maybe not, but the underlying problems that you see do not get corrected at all.
And the underlying problems are?
Monopolies.
Monopolies run the country.
Yes.
And the world.
Yes. Yeah, and you can't change it by representing somebody, one person hurt by a monopoly. If you're lucky, you get some money, but the underlying condition doesn't change at all.
But monopolies don't start out as monopolies. Google didn't start out monopolizing the internet.
Google started out with a great idea, and they
that was open to competition.
That is true, but they've acquired 65 companies now.
And
there's a doctrine that says that if you acquire your monopoly by acquisition, you're not allowed to do it.
There's a law.
There's a
it's
called the Sherman Antitrust Act. You're not allowed, or the Clayton Act section.
And that was put in place because the government saw that monopolies were getting too powerful.
It was a populist movement to try to correct the problems where, for example, the A&P and other major food chains would be taking fees, would be taking money from people to put their goods in the store, and the smaller companies couldn't get into the store.
So it'd be like Chase acquiring the Citibank,
Right.
and that should be illegal.
Or Bank of America acquiring Countrywide, or you know what I mean. That what's happened is that there's been a greater concentration as a result of the problems. That we have fewer banks, we have less competition, we have more concentration of capital, so that maybe one or two people now can allocate as much money as is needed to control the government. You only have, I mean, congressmen sell out for very little.
Right.
They don't need that much, $1 million or so. That's nothing.
Right.
Compared to a multi-trillion-dollar economy, to buy 532 people or whatever is nothing.
So if you're running for state attorney general, what do you hope to do? And why don't you like Como?
Well, he caused the problem.
How did he cause the problem?
In HUD, he was the one that allowed HUD in the federal agency. He was the head of the federal agency, and he advocated and created the rule that allowed people to go into their homes without putting anything in the homes. They didn't have to have a penny, and he gave them mortgages.
And that created this whole...
It did, because people...
Well, he wasn't the only one that created the problem.
Well, the others along with him, but the banks then took that easily created mortgage and then resold it to people, telling them it was valuable when in fact it was not.
So you're saying...
Because the people couldn't pay the mortgage. They sold mortgages to people that couldn't pay it.
And
then they resold that paper without telling people.
Isn't the person who goes for the mortgage, aren't they responsible?
No, they are, but they have no money.
Yeah,
they gave away mortgages to people that had no money.
But if I want to buy a house and don't know how I'm going to pay for it, I mean...
The banks would give you the house even though you couldn't pay for it.
Know that...
You would know.
Would I think,
you would know, but the people that bought your mortgage didn't know.
What would I think would happen in a month or two?
It's not you. It's the people that bought the paper.
It's also self-responsibility. I'm not blaming
You're
the
not
banks.
looking at the people that bought the paper. The people that bought those investments from the bank did not know that you couldn't pay the mortgage. So
but
they paid top dollar. But
the
people that bought the paper weren't told by the bank that you could not pay the mortgage.
But the banks
defrauded.
Knew that.
Yes, oh yeah.
The banks knew
they
that.
Absolutely knew that.
And they did it anyway.
Yes, and they resold the paper on the day one. They resold it immediately and took a profit.
Oh, so they sold it
immediately, the same day.
Oh, that is...
They took their profit out.
Illegal.
Yeah,
like
it's a fraud.
Oh, so who did they sell those mortgages
to? The dummies in the world that bought the investment from the biggest banks in America,
who was that, though?
The world, the Chinese, anyway.
So the Chinese
and the Russians, the Germans, everyone. It infiltrated the entire world.
Starting in the U.S.?
Yeah.
So aren't the Chinese upset that they all have all these bad...
Everyone's upset. The whole economy in the world has been taken down by this.
So how do you correct this?
Well, here's the problem. Here's the way of doing it.
Okay.
If we had, do you agree that if we had had law enforcement, this wouldn't have occurred?
Laws that respect, I agree.
I'm going to take you through the logic here.
Okay.
You agree that we should have had law enforcement?
Well,
and that we didn't.
You can't sell something. I mean, you could sell something that's worthless, but
we should have stopped it with law enforcement.
Yeah.
And you agree that at the federal level, we really haven't had law enforcement.
Well, I don't know. I don't really look in, but it looks like we haven't.
We haven't had SEC,
I guess
all
it looks
these
like
people.
We haven't had
so
that, no.
Would you also agree then that if the federal government isn't enforcing law, that New York State is the most important state that could have enforced it?
Why
through
is New
the
York,
Attorney
why
General?
About California?
Well, because New York is the financial center.
Oh.
Light. So Spitzer started to enforce a little bit, maybe 1% of what he could have done, and he became a king and a hero. So he, having the acclaim of everyone, then took that acclaim and went and said, I'm going to become governor and kick ass and do all these things. But the power...
Do you think he was set up by people?
Yes, because he kicked ass and they got rid of him for that reason.
You think they got rid of him?
Yes.
It wasn't. They went looking.
They got him, and they found a technicality of a prostitute, and they got him on that ground.
Do you think he was set up that way?
It might have been.
Or
might have been.
You think they purposely looked into let's see how we can get Spitzer and take him down?
Because he was out there undermining the rich.
We should get Spitzer on the program and have him talk about that.
He would probably say that.
Okay.
So Spitzer made a mistake because he had the power, the power of the Attorney General in New York State, because the federal government doesn't enforce anything, is the most awesome elective position in the country. You can do something whereas nobody else can.
Well,
everyone else needs approval. The President Obama needs approval.
Oh, but the Attorney General
needs
doesn't.
no approval. He's elected, can't be fired. He raises his own money by suing people, raised $3 billion in the year 2003, doesn't need the Assembly a vote, doesn't need the Senate vote.
What does he do? What kind of, what can
he enforces law, that's all.
How does he enforce law?
By bringing lawsuits.
He brings lawsuits.
As an enforcing official.
So he's the head
He's
law
the chief law enforcer
official.
for the nation.
Like, that's why
he should be.
That's why Bobby Kennedy was so good, right?
That's
Because he
right.
actually
That's
did
the chief enforcing lawyer for the nation.
Lawyer for the nation.
Yes. That's the most powerful elected position in the goddamn country. And I'm seeking that because I can change things by enforcing law.
And what will you do?
Number one.
Yes.
How about opening up a stock exchange to finance small business with local investors so they can hire people locally and expand business locally and keep the money in town? How about that for openers? That's the responsibility of the Attorney General of New York State. He's the only one that can authorize that.
Okay, I like that.
Okay,
I like
not
that.
bad,
I
right?
Like that.
How about setting up tuition-free equivalency colleges in every town and village, in the area surrounding every town and village, so people can learn how to become self-employed, how to become small business.
Tuition-free. Free colleges.
Yeah, because I would have a town attorney general appointed by every town to expand the office of the attorney general by doing it locally.
A local law enforcement.
Right, local,
what...
to enforce your rights instead of your duties. We have too much prosecution. We have no enforcement of our rights. We've lost our rights.
So we have too many people violating rights, but we don't have anyone saying this is your right.
Right. Nobody enforcing it at government expense. So we need to have somebody do that. Spitzer was doing that.
He was doing it.
He raised $3 billion a year that way.
So we need the enforcers of rights.
Right.
We need people to
we need an attorney general.
Rights are.
We need an attorney general in every town to go after the wrongdoers and collect the money they've stolen from the town and use that to educate the town.
Oh, Carl, this is very exciting. Good luck with this. I wish you success. How can people support you?
I'm not sure. I have a website, carlpearson4nyag.com.
Okay.
The 4 is numeral 4.
Talking to Carl Pearson, and good luck. Running for State Attorney General. Put him on the ballot, support him, send in your signature, I guess. Go to the website, and good luck.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I appreciate the show, too.
Thank you.
I really appreciate where you're coming from.
Good, thank you. I do. I can see that.
Yeah, no, it's exciting.
It takes a while, but I'm going to go in the back of a truck around New York State and say the same thing that I've told you.
I hope you do. This is Alan Steinfeld for New Realities. Email me at newrealities@earthlink.net and check my website, newrealities.com. Thanks for watching.
That was an exciting show.
Yes, some good stuff. No, we didn't even get to half of it, but no, it's good. It's good. Let me see what Paula's going to be right now.
Yeah.
Paula?
A person on a jury has a right to come up with a just verdict, even though it goes against what the judge is saying. But you're not allowed to tell the jury that.